The wood beneath you moans with every shift of the waves, a low, aching sound that seeps into your bones. The longship moves like a living thing, its ribs straining, its breath the groan of waterlogged timbers. You are chained in the belly of it, your wrists raw where iron bites the skin. The air is heavy with the stench of tar, damp wool, unwashed flesh, and the copper tang of old blood. It burns the back of your throat with every breath you take. Above, boots thud in slow, deliberate patterns. The sound is different from the restless pacing you've learned to ignore. These steps are measured. Purposeful. The murmur of voices follows, low, guttural, sharp-edged with the cold cadence of Old Norse. You can't make out the words, but you know the tone. Men deciding. Men settling something final. Somewhere in those syllables is the weight of your fate. The torch fixed to the beam sways with the ship's movement, casting an unsteady amber light that glances off the faces around you. Most avert their eyes. A few stare, their gaze glassy and hollow, as if already adrift far from here. The light catches on splinters in the planks, on the rust creeping over iron bolts, on the dark stains sunk deep into the wood, stains no scrubbing could ever erase. Salt water seeps between the seams, pooling in shallow depressions on the floor, cold against your bare feet. The sea presses against the hull like a patient predator, its rhythm constant, its strength absolute. Every so often, a drop falls from above, icy and sudden, sliding down the side of your neck. You were not brought here as cargo. You were taken as proof of a chieftain's reach, of his victory, of his right to claim what he desired. You were once dressed in furs and silver, seated where all could see you at the feasting bench, your presence another jewel in the warlord's crown. That was seasons ago. In the Viking world, beauty and use are both measured in moments, and the moment you ceased to serve was the moment you began to cost him. The boots above stop. Silence settles, broken only by the creak of the mast and the restless sea. Then a different sound, the heavy rasp of the hatch being dragged open. Night air pours down, raw and sharp, smelling of brine, wet rope, and the endless black water beyond the hull. A shadow blocks the torchlight. The man above looks down at you without a flicker of recognition, as if you were never more than part of the plunder. His eyes measure you not as a person, but as a thing whose worth has run out. The decision has been made. And in the darkness beyond the longship's edge, the sea waits, wide and merciless. Once, you were not chained in darkness. Once, the air around you was thick with the scent of roasted boar and pine resin, the hall alive with the glow of firelight and the hum of voices. You sat near the high seat, where the chieftain held court over his warriors and traders, where laughter rose like smoke and the clink of drinking horns marked the rhythm of the night. Your shoulders were draped in furs soft enough to silence the winter's bite, your wrists ringed in silver that caught the fire's glow. You were there to be seen, a living symbol of power, the spoils of some far coast where your life had once been your own. The skalds sang verses that wound your name into their stanzas, your beauty and obedience folded neatly into tales of conquest. Around you, warriors measured themselves against each other in strength and cunning, but your value lay in a different arena. You were the quiet proof of victory, the ornament of triumph, the softness that contrasted the iron. But in the Viking world, such value has an end. Victory grows stale in the telling. New campaigns bring new plunder. The skalds begin to sing other names, the chieftain's gaze begins to drift, and in a hall where every possession is a weapon of status, even a concubine can become a burden. Under the Grogus law code, you were property, no more protected than the weapons on the wall or the hawks in the mews. At the ing, men debated land boundaries and blood feuds, not the fate of those who warmed their beds. The change came without warning. One night, the bench you were offered was further from the fire. The gift ceased. Your presence became background, unnoticed, your face a shadow in the torchlight. And then, without words, came the order. You were taken from the hall into the raw bite of night air, the snow crunching under the boots that surrounded you. The warmth you had once known was behind you now, the light shrinking with each step, until all that remained was the sound of the wind and the certainty that you would not return. They brought you to the river's edge. The ice that was clear enough to see the black water moving beneath it, slow and unstoppable. A torch was thrust into the snowbank, its flame a meager defiance against the darkness. Your shoes were stripped from you. The cold hit your feet like a blade, the skin shrinking tight against bone. This was the ice trial. You would stand barefoot on the frozen river, your only task to endure. The men watched, their breath pluming in the air, their laughter muffled behind fur-lined collars. This was not an execution, it was a spectacle. The frost climbed your legs in invisible hands, stealing sensation, then strength. The ache in your bones became a hollow throb, your vision narrowing as the blood retreated from your skin to guard your core. The ice beneath you cracked in tiny, treacherous pops, each one a whisper that the river would take you. The longer you stood, the more you swayed, the more they smiled. This was not mercy. This was theater. The cold itself their chosen weapon, and the sight of you breaking under it the entertainment of the night. If you've made it this far, you've already witnessed the first of many horrors history tried to bury. If you can watch and walk away without hitting subscribe, at least explain in the comments why you turn away from voices the past tried to silence. When the cold had finished its work, they did not leave you to die on the ice. Death was too final, too swift. Instead, they hauled you back to the longship, not as a passenger, but as part of its fate. The hull loomed above you, its curved prow carved with the head of a beast, a guardian for those it carried. You were bound and lowered into its belly, the board smelling of pitch and salt, your body pressed against coils of rope and bundles of kindling. Above, the night sky was a void, the stars remote and indifferent. This was no voyage. It was a sentence. Among the Norse, ships were more than tools of war. They were vessels for the soul's passage, offerings to the gods, symbols that outlived the men who built them. Archaeologists have uncovered the graves of queens and chieftains, Oseberg, Dockstad, where ships were buried whole, filled with treasures for the afterlife. But the sagas speak of other ships, ships meant not to honor but to erase. Those condemned were lashed inside, surrounded by offerings not of gold or silk, but of fuel for the pyre. Sometimes the ship would be dragged ashore and set alight, the flames painting the night with a message to every rival: this is the fate of those who defy or outlive their usefulness. Other times, the ship would be towed to deeper water, the ropes cut, the hull filling slowly until the sea claimed it whole. For the living within, the creak of wood and the hush of the tide were the last sounds they would ever hear. The threat of the longship burial was as potent as the act itself. It was a promise to the victim that their body would not rest in familiar earth, that their soul would wander far from the warmth of kin. And to those who watched, it was a reminder that the same wood that carried warriors to glory could just as easily carry the forgotten into the dark. But the Vikings knew that not every death needed fire or water to destroy. Sometimes a name was more fragile than flesh. It began with the skalds, the poets whose verses could immortalize a man's deeds or strip them of worth entirely. At the command of the chieftain, they would turn their tongues to cruelty. Your beauty, once praised in verse, became the subject of mockery. They spoke of your fall in words sharp enough to cut, twisting truth with embellishment until your shame became a song. These verses were not whispered in corners, they were performed at feasts, the laughter of the hall sealing your exile more completely than any wall or chain. In Norse society, reputation was a currency more valuable than silver. Once tarnished, it could not be restored. The skald's mockery ensured that no clan would take you in, no warrior would claim you, no hearth would welcome you. You were alive, but untouchable, stripped of the one thing that could keep you from starving on the edge of the world, your place within it. If hearing this cruelty shocks you, subscribe so we can keep dragging the truth from the shadows. If you won't, tell me in the comments why silencing these stories feels easier than remembering them. Exile did not always mean death. Sometimes, it meant being turned into a weapon of insult. There were times when a concubine, once treasured for her beauty or her lineage, would find herself at the center of a cruel kind of diplomacy. The chieftain who no longer wanted you would not simply cast you out into the cold. Instead, you would be sent, not to safety, not to freedom, but into the hands of his enemies. It was a calculated gift, wrapped in humiliation. The Heimskringla speaks of alliances sealed with women taken in raids, but it also whispers of the reverse, the deliberate sending of an unwanted concubine into the hall of a rival as a statement. She was a reminder that the sender had so much that he could give away what others would covet. But the true sting was in the message it carried: "This is what I think of you." In the accounts of Ahmad ibn Fadlan, who watched the Norse with an outsider's careful eye, there are descriptions of captives sent deep into dangerous territories, lands on the fringes of Viking control, where life was cheap and loyalty fragile. There, a discarded concubine could find herself at the mercy of warriors eager to prove themselves, or thrust into a court where every face was a stranger and every word a threat. The gift was poison, the journey, a sentence. But exile was not the only weapon the Vikings wielded to keep the living in line. There was a word that could still the tongue, stiffen the spine, and drain the blood from a man's face: blrn. The blood eagle. Even in its time, there was debate over whether the ritual was truth or terror. The sagas speak of it in fragments: a prisoner laid face down, his ribs severed from the spine, the lungs pulled out and spread wide so they resembled the wings of a bird. It may have been rare, it may have been ritual, it may have been a myth, but it did not have to be common to work. The threat alone was enough. To hear a warrior say your name in the same breath as the blood eagle was to know that you could become a warning, your death a performance meant to be remembered. Whether the execution itself was real or not mattered little in the moment. The mind filled in the rest. Fear was sharper than any axe, and the shadow of the blood eagle stretched far beyond the fires where its stories were told. You're deep in a world where fear is sharper than any axe. If you've stayed, it's because you want the truth. Hit subscribe, or tell me in the comments why you'd rather these stories be forgotten. There were places in the Viking world where even the fiercest warriors hesitated to tread. Low mounds overgrown with grass, stones blackened by age, hollows in the earth where nothing grew. These were Draugr places whispered to be the resting grounds of the restless dead. For the discarded, they could become a final prison. You might be led there under the pale light of the moon, your wrists bound, your breath forming quick clouds in the cold air. The men who brought you would not need to strike you or shout threats. They would simply fasten you to a weathered post or a half-buried stone and walk away, their torches bobbing into the darkness until the night swallowed them whole. It was not just the cold or the hunger that would kill you here. It was the knowledge of where you were. The Draugr were not just ghosts. They were corpses that walked, swollen with death, guarding their treasure and their graves. To die in their shadow was to risk never reaching the afterlife, to be trapped forever between worlds, feared and shunned. The living would not come near you, not to help, not to bury you, not even to steal the rags from your body. Alone in the silence, you would feel every rustle of grass, every whisper of wind, and wonder if it was the earth itself shifting to let something rise. But for some, death was delayed in favor of something crueler. A broken concubine could still be made useful. There were halls where the new captives, fresh from raids, were not broken by warriors or overseers but by those who had once been just like them. You might be dragged from the shadows, your body marked with the signs of your fall, your voice carrying the weight of what you had endured. You would be ordered to explain to the trembling newcomers what awaited them. To strip away their hope before the warriors even laid a hand on them. The sagas speak, in passing, of thralls set over other thralls, of slaves made into enforcers under the gaze of their masters. It was a test as much as a tactic. If you obeyed, it proved your loyalty to your captors. If you hesitated, you proved nothing at all, except that you still had something left to lose. In either case, the chieftain won. We are walking through the ashes of real lives. If you can bear to know this and not subscribe, tell me why in the comments, because silence is another kind of erasure. There were times when your fate was not to die, but to be paraded as something worse than dead. During the great blot sacrifices, when animals, and sometimes men, were given to the gods, you could be brought before the gathering not as an offering to be slain, but as one to be spared in mockery. They would drape you in the remnants of your former finery, the furs now ragged, the silver tarnished. You would walk at the edge of the procession, close enough for the crowd to see your face, but far from the altar where blood was spilled. The priests would chant, the warriors would drink, and you would stand there marked as a living curse, a body unclaimed by the gods, an existence left to rot under the weight of shame. In the Norse mind, fate, WIRD, was a thread spun, measured, and cut. Death could be an honorable ending, but dishonor could follow you into eternity. To be publicly shown as unwanted was to have your thread twisted into something tangled and foul, a story no skald would sing except in jest. And if humiliation did not end you, the sea might. There were voyages where the horizon was endless and the cold air burned the inside of your lungs. On such a journey, you might find yourself dragged from the benches and taken to the side of the ship. Your hands and feet bound, a stone lashed to your chest, the rope digging into your ribs. The water below was not the gentle blue of summer shallows, it was black, heavy, and infinite. Christian missionaries wrote of captives thrown overboard without prayer or ceremony, their bodies vanishing beneath the surface before the ripples could reach the stern. Arabic traders recorded tales of women cast into the northern seas during storms, the weight of the stone ensuring they sank without a trace. The Vikings understood the sea not just as a path to wealth, but as a grave too vast for memory. But even if you survived the humiliation and the voyages, survival could be its own cruelty. You might be brought back to the hall, not to reclaim your place, but to watch it filled by another. The new concubine would wear your clothing, sit in your seat, drink from the horn that once touched your lips. She would smile at the chieftain in the same way you once did, laugh at the same words, move through the hall with a grace rehearsed to match your own. In the Viking world, continuity was a mark of strength. A hall that looked unchanged was a hall untouched by loss. You were not erased by absence, you were erased by replacement, your memory overwritten in the minds of those who once knew you. And from whatever dark corner you were allowed to occupy, you would see yourself living on in someone else's skin. Grim histories exist so these patterns aren't lost in the snowdrift of time. Subscribe now, or step into the comments and tell us why you'd leave these truths to freeze and vanish. The final cruelty was not always death. Sometimes, it was the return. After months, or years, of exile, humiliation, and cold, you would be brought back through the hall's heavy doors. The same hall where you once sat wrapped in furs, where the firelight once gilded your face. Now, your clothing was plain, your body thinner, your skin marked by the life you had endured outside. The warriors who turned their heads to watch you enter did not see a prize. They saw a lesson. The chieftain sat in the high seat, his expression unreadable. Around him, the benches were full, the air thick with mead, the smoke from the hearth curling toward the roof beams. The new concubine sat near him, her posture mirroring yours from another lifetime. They would make you stand there while the hall fell silent, the weight of every eye pressing against you. Then the choice would be spoken aloud, you may leave and take your freedom, or you may remain here in service. It was no choice at all. Freedom meant stepping into a world where your name was stained, where no clan would take you, where every winter storm could be your last. Remaining meant food, shelter, and the illusion of belonging, even if it came at the cost of obedience. Most chose to stay. They would lower their gaze, step forward, and kneel. The chieftain would nod, satisfied, and the hall would roar back to life, the moment swallowed by song and laughter as though nothing had happened. But you would know the truth, that survival had become indistinguishable from surrender. This was just one saga of cruelty in the Viking Age. Click the next Grim Histories episode to uncover the chapter even though the skalds refuse to sing.